Hello there and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is our 24 New World News Program, streaming live from the capital Algiers, and coming up next in our news program. China's defense minister speaking at Shangri-La Dialogue, Singapore, said that burden of improving the troubled U.S.-China ties lies on Washington. Tens of thousands of protesters have rallied across the U.S. to call for stricter gun laws in the wake of two mass shootings. As Russia's persistent warfare continues to ravage Ukraine, a top Ukrainian official said that the Ukrainian forces are now running out of ammunition. Sri Lanka's Prime Minister, in an interview with the news agency, said that he would first look to other sources, but would be open to buying more crude from Moscow. Hello again and welcome. Those were today's top stories. At Sri Lanka Defense Summit in Singapore, the Chinese defense minister has vowed in a speech that China will fight to the very end to stop Taiwan from declaring independence. On the other hand, the U.S. Defense Secretary said Washington does not support Taiwanese independence. Nabil Khazini has more to tell.
The Shangri-La Dialogue witnessed this year a tense discussion on Taiwan between the world's two superpowers. The U.S. Minister of Defense denounced China's military activity near Taiwan in response to his Chinese counterpart, who said that Beijing was ready to fight for the island.
If anyone dares to secede Taiwan from China, we will not hesitate to fight. We will fight at all costs, and we definitely will fight to the very end. This is the only choice for China.
Beijing considers Taiwan to be an integral part of China, but the unprecedented incursions by Chinese military aircraft into the Taiwanese air defense zone have increased the pressure in recent months.
We see growing coercion from Beijing. We've witnessed a steady increase in provocative and destabilizing military activity near Taiwan, and that includes PLA aircraft flying near Taiwan in record numbers in recent months.
In the context of China-US strategic competition, President Joe Biden's first visit to Japan attracted particular attention. China sees that his new Indo-Pacific strategy will lead to conflict and confrontation. Washington, meanwhile, says it does not support Taiwanese independence, and that Joe Biden administration categorically opposes any changes of the status quo.
I think that a stable military-to-military relationship will serve the interests of the two countries, and it is a common expectation of the international community.
The United States has adopted strategic ambiguity on the island's issue. Washington has promised to abide by the One China policy and does not recognize or have a formal relationship with the government of Taiwan. However, it has continuously provided military assistance to the island to boost its defense capabilities.
Streets across the U.S. have been filled with thousands of demonstrations calling for gun control amid the surge of mass shootings across the country. Islam Seed on what's follow.
The recent surge of gun violence in the United States has prompted many people in different cities to take the streets and called on Congress for stricter gun laws.
Gun violence is an America's problem, and for too long she has not valued the lives of the black, brown, and the poor.
People in Washington, D.C., Texas, New York, and Florida demand a better control of firearms after recent killings which took many lives across the country, including children.
So when I'm in committee offering gun sense legislation and they show up with their guns on their hips, come on and watch it. I'm not afraid of you.
There's still too many ways we're letting the gun industry and the NRA get away with things. We got to fight harder.
Speaker after speaker called on senators who are seen as a major barrier to pass these legislations.
We can't go to school without worry about gun violence, and just to mass shootings, how much it's increased all over the years. I think it's kind of plain ridiculous how there's more shootings than days of the year.
It gives me hope that maybe something can be done. It's hard because we've done this before and we haven't seen any changes.
President Joe Biden said on Saturday that those demanding to have their voices heard should keep marching.
Yes, keep marching. It's important. Look, this has to become an election issue. The way people listen, senators, congressmen, is when people say, this is going to affect my vote.
The House of Representatives voted on Wednesday to ban the sale of semi-automatic rifles to under 21 and high-capacity magazines. But there has been almost no chance of moving to the Senate, where the support of 10 conservatives is needed to achieve a qualified majority. However, there are discussions between parliamentarians of both parties to find a middle ground.
Many members of the white supremacist organization were detained and accused of plotting a riot near an event in northwest Idaho. According to Lee White, the police chief in Idaho, 31 members of the Patriot Front are facing misdemeanor charges of conspiracy to riot, with more charges possible later.
They were wearing arm patches. One of them said Patriot Front. The majority of them had logos on their hats. They were consistent with the Patriot Front group that you would see online. They were also wearing khaki pants, and everyone was dressed exactly the same. Well, very, very similar anyway. And if you go online and look up Patriot Front, that's exactly how these individuals were dressed.
To the Russia-Ukraine file, Russian troops control most of the city of Severodonetsk, an important enclave in the Donbass region, which will receive advanced missile systems from the U.S. The troops already occupied half of the city, as confirmed by its mayor, but the city is still defending itself, while EU Commission surprises a country with a visit. Usama Iyadi.
According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, Russia's troops have destroyed hundreds of military targets in continued ground and air missile attacks. As for the Ukrainian side, they claim to have pushed back the Russian troops, advancing toward Bakhmut city in eastern Ukraine. In a press briefing, Ukrainian Defense Ministry affirmed that the battle for Severodonetsk saw some Ukrainian troops lose up to 90% of their effective military response, as they have withdrawn towards Lysychansk. Meanwhile, Ukrainian president renewed his calls on Western countries for more ammunition as the latter ran out. Elsewhere in Severodonetsk, troops are still in control of Azot chemical plant amidst fierce confrontations between armies.
The situation in the Donbass region is very tough. Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Krakow are now in the epicenter of the confrontation. Taking into account the presence of a large chemical plant in Severodonetsk, the strikes of Russian army there, among other places including air bombings, is simply madness.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen made a surprise visit to Kyiv, where she met the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Underlining his bid to join the EU bloc, Ukraine's leader called for new sanctions to target more Russian officials, including judges, and to hamper the activities of all banks, as well as gas giant Gazprom's, and all Russian companies helping Moscow in any way.
6 packages of EU sanctions have become a tangible instrument of pressure on Russia during the war. However, the war, unfortunately, is still going on. So the 7th package of sanctions is needed, and it must become even more powerful.
This comes ahead of the decision of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz to visit the Ukrainian capital Kyiv by the end of June as part of his support to the war-torn country.
Still in Ukraine, the Russian-backed authorities in southern Ukraine say they have started handing out Russian passports to locals in the two cities, Kherson and Mariupol. The Russian TASS agency said 23 Kherson residents received a Russian passport at a ceremony through a simplified procedures. The agency also stated that thousands in the neighboring Zaporizhzhia region, which covers Mariupol, applied for the Russian citizenship. In the same line of thought, according to Ukrainian authorities, Russian shelling destroyed the warehouse in the Black Sea port city over the weekend. Vitaly Kim, governor of the Mikhailov region, said on Wednesday that Russia was attacking food and agricultural targets in order to scare the world into agreeing on a deal to reopen the Black Sea on Moscow's terms. Satellite images released by Plant Labs PBC also showed the destruction of a grain storage facility in April in the low-gas city of Robyzhyn.
They want to do this because they're trying to trade.
They want to do this because they are trying to trade about opening the Black Sea for trade. That's why they shoot more. They shoot the agricultural enterprises, even fields just for their own movie. That field's on fire. When they shoot agricultural enterprises and grain facilities and storages, they are trying to make the situation look like there is a catastrophe. An agriculture and food sector are the economy of the whole world. That's why they're rolling in the news, which is bad. This is a catastrophe, etc. Why? Because they are saying, okay, we can let you go with the trade, but give us something instead.
Give us something instead.
During his visit to North Macedonia and Bulgaria on Saturday, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz tried to resolve the dispute between both countries. The German Chancellor, who played the role of mediator during his Western Balkan trip, called for the EU to start membership talks, but seemed to achieve a little progress in Sofia, where the Bulgarian government repeated its objection to North Macedonia's accession. The current main obstacles for North Macedonia is dispute with Bulgaria over history and language.
The Western Balkans are of a strategic importance for Germany, and I am in favor of their EU membership. For soon 20 years, Western Balkan states have been promised a European perspective. It's time to practice what we preach.
To a different matter now, French voters go to the polls in the first of the two rounds that will decide whether President Emmanuel Macron gets a working majority in parliament or ends up without the support needed to drive through his referendum agenda. In less than 2 months after winning re-election, Macron faces a strong challenge from a united left-wing bloc that polls show could deprive the president of an outright majority even if he does not take control of parliament.
What used to be considered a certainty, the fact that the president's party would have an absolute majority, is more and more challenged. They could have a majority, but not an absolute one, because the new strategy with France Unbowed Party, the Socialist Party and the Greens could gather some votes and disrupt Macron's party, and perhaps not necessarily create a leftist majority, but really balance the forces in power.
Iran and Venezuela signed a 20-year deal on cooperation during a visit to the Islamic Republic by Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro. Miriam Zian.
Iran and Venezuela signed a 2-decade cooperation roadmap during a 2-day visit by President Nicolas Maduro to Tehran, as both countries are subject to heavy U.S. sanctions.
This year in 2022, we have gotten to a point where we are in better conditions, more prepared and stronger to coordinate the strength of Iran and Venezuela into a truly extraordinary cooperation.
The Venezuelan president met his Iranian counterpart with a high-level political and economic delegation and was warmly welcomed by Tehran. The two oil-rich nations agreed in a joint conference to raise bilateral relations and to cooperate in political, cultural and economic sectors.
The Islamic Republic of Iran's foreign policy has always been to maintain ties with independent nations, and Venezuela showed exemplary resistance in the face of threats and sanctions by enemies and imperialism.
It is worth mentioning that earlier in May, Maduro hosted Iran's oil ministers to discuss cooperation in energy and defeat sanctions imposed by the West. At the Summit of the Americas, Blinken said he would resume the political dialogue with Venezuela.
And in our judgment, Venezuelan-led negotiations between the Maduro regime and the unitary platform are the best path that we can see to trying to restore to Venezuelans a democracy that they clearly deserve and clearly want.
Like Venezuela, Tehran is facing U.S. economic sanctions, but regards them as an opportunity to move the country forward. After snubbing the Summit of the Americas and visiting Turkey and Algeria, Venezuela is seeking to strengthen ties with Iran, which were already existent in Chavez's era.
In Africa now, after the clashes between armed groups, which erupted on Friday to Saturday night in the Libyan capital Tripoli, Algerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs said in a statement that Algeria follows the development in the neighboring country with great concern and warns all Libyan parties against the risk of dropping the country into chaos and leading it to the point of no return. On Saturday, hundreds of demonstrators blocked the Basra-Baghdad motorway in an attempt to persuade the Iraqi government to provide them with full employment prospects in oil businesses. The majority of the demonstrators were low-wages employees who had been promised full-time jobs by the government. They say, however, that the services were shortly terminated and that promises of full-time work never materialized. Dozens of people went out to the streets to demand a return to civilian rule in Sudan since this military took control in October. The same pro-democracy organization has refused to negotiate with the generals, insisting that they first hand over authority to a civilian administration, return to the barracks, halt the brutality against protesters, and free all detainees. In Khartoum, Yasser Arman told reporters he believed that discussions would provide a safe exit for both the military and the people forward democracy, justice, and a new society. According to Survivor International and Auckland Institute, scores of police officers arrived to evict Maasai tribe people from the region in order to make room for a wildlife reserve for the United Arab Emirates. Royal Family, both organizations released video from the region, which include the villages of Ololuskwana and Kirtalo on social media. This allegedly showed fires rising as gunshots rang out in the background, and the Maasai protesters fled for safety after the protest turned violent. Tanzania's government has signed a framework agreement on Saturday with Norway's Equinor and Britain's Shell. The deal will bring them closer to start a construction of a $30 billion liquefied natural gas project. The agreement foresees a final investment decision by 2025 and the start of operation by 2029-2030. The newly appointed Sri Lanka Prime Minister said that his country may be compelled to buy more oil from Russia as the island nation has desperately for fuel amid unprecedented economic crisis. The Premier said he would first look to other sources, but would be open to buying more crude from Moscow.
We need the fuel, and now we are negotiating with private suppliers. It's not that we go and buy anything, it's the private suppliers who give us oil and we buy it from them. So part of it, the issue here is that there's a lot of oil going around which can be sourced back informally to Iran or to Russia. So sometimes you may not know what oil you are buying, but we are looking at other sources of oil, fuel that are traditional sources from the Middle East, where we have been purchasing fuel.
With gasoline prices hitting a record high and the cost of food soaring, many Americans are evaluating whether to change their spending habits as the U.S. annual inflation sees the largest gain in over 4 decades. It was a sticker shock for many people buying gasoline at a gas station in Washington, D.C., while national gasoline prices are flirting with $5 per gallon, as the price for the cheapest octane was $5.43 a gallon and a pump stopped at $76.53 per dollar.
U.S. inflation accelerated in May with the Labor Department's Consumer Price Index rising 8.6% from a year ago, marking the highest level in more than 4 decades.
Oh my God, I'm just so shocked this morning that when I passed by a gas station and with the price going up again. So very concerned about how much this is going to change in my routine, and I wasn't thinking about it yet. So
The stock market plummeted on the news from the Labor Department, which reported Friday that gasoline prices hit a record high and the cost of the services rose further, suggesting that the Federal Reserve could continue with its 50 basis point interest rate hikes through September to fight inflation. Gas prices were flirting with an average $5 per gallon on Friday, indicated that the monthly CPI would remain elevated in June. U.S. President Joe Biden on Friday accused the U.S. oil industry, and ExxonMobil in particular, of capitalizing on the supply shortage to fatten profits. Inflation in May was also boosted by higher prices for other goods like food, surging amid geopolitical conflict and health restrictions in China that dislocated supply chains. Biden, who came into office vowing to reduce U.S. dependence on fossil fuels, said he was hoping to speed up oil production, which is expected to hit record highs in the United States next year.
Because of the strong foundation we built, we're better positioned than just about any country in the world to overcome the global inflation we're seeing and to take the next step towards forming a historic recovery and a new moment. And I count recovery as going from where we are today in terms of the economy to stability, to make it stable. It is strong as can be, but for inflation, but for gas and food.
Biden also issued a warning to the industry, whose profits have jumped as it increased prices, in a sign that consumers are paying for more than just higher labor and shipping costs.
They formed three consortia. These companies have raised their prices by as much as 1,000%. So everything coming from Asia, they get 90-some% of it, the stuff coming from Asia. They've raised it by 1,000%. That's why I called on Congress to crack down on their foreign-owned shipping companies that raise their prices while raking in just last year $190 billion in profit.
Friday's inflation report was published ahead of an anticipated second 50 basis point rate hike from the Fed next Wednesday. The U.S. Central Bank is also expected to raise its policy interest rate by an additional 0.5 percentage point in July.
And now, away of politics and food prices, let's follow this cultural news in this report.
The Canadian singer Justin Bieber has revealed on his Instagram that he's suffering from facial paralysis after canceling shows this week, showing his 240 million followers how the right side of his face didn't move. The 28-year-old pop star said that the condition is due to diagnosis of Ramsay-Hunt syndrome.
Norway opens its new 650 million National Museum to the public on Saturday, unveiling a vast permanent exhibition of art through the ages that puts it on a par with some of the world's greatest museums.
The Saint Jérôme masterpiece of Leonardo da Vinci was hung on Tuesday in France Museum before the inauguration on Friday of the exhibition dedicated to this exceptional lawn from the Vatican museums. According to art historians, the painting dates back to the 1480s.
Over its 60 years of existence, the Annecy International Animation Film Festival has been a global event dedicated to animation, bringing together the industry's leading professionals and celebrating the creativity and diversity of animation styles and techniques. The industry's main global event will take place Monday 13th until Saturday 18th.
Authorities revealed the finding of probably human biological matter in a remote section of the Brazilian Amazon on Friday as part of their investigation into the disappearances of British journalist Dom Philip and Brazilian engineer Bruno Pereira.
Research team have discovered probably human biological matter in the river near the port of Antalya do Norte. The federal police said in a statement, a voice for his research with the armed forces and local teams. The federal police did not say if the organic debris was discovered on the bank of the Itaca River in the state of Amazon, where the two men were traveling when they disappeared.
The Bolsonaro government is not worried about our delimited lands, which is why the Indian National Foundation has weakened considerably. The Indian National Foundation is finished. It is used to inspect and prosecute fishermen and invaders, but now they don't.
The two men traveled together in the valley of Cavari, a difficult access zone of the western Amazon. close to Peru and considered as dangerous with the presence of all kinds of traffickers.
He got out of his apartment, took his stuff, went downstairs and started packing them, putting it in the car and walking out the door of the inn. He said, "I think my life now is the journey."
On Wednesday, the federal police said they were not rolling out and leads, including the killing, in dangerous location.
Today is Saturday. The disappearance took place on Sunday, and I think it is possible that Bruno is alive.
Bruno Pereira was usually threatened, according to local indigenous activists, for his struggle against encroachment on indigenous land.
Bruno has always been very effective here in the region. When he worked for the Indian National Foundation, he was very committed to his actions. So he has a lot of experience in public service. We had a very good relationship.
The mayor of an Amazon region, where a British journalist and indigenous official disappeared, vowed on Saturday for the truth to come out on what is peaceful community sustained by fishing.
And with this Amazon's investigation, we put an end for our bulletin. Thank you so much for being with us. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.